The Galactic Council chamber was alive with murmurs, a chorus of different species exchanging hushed words. The vast, domed hall shimmered with artificial starlight, an intentional aesthetic meant to inspire unity. Delegates from 100 worlds gathered here, towering reptilians, gelatinous intellects, multi-limbed strategists, and ethereal beings of light. At the center of the room, a hologram flickered to life, displaying a blue-green planet. Earth. High Chancellor Vorthax, a towering insectoid from the Vrunach Dominion, tapped his claws against the stone podium. His voice, a series of clicks and hums translated into the universal language, echoed across the chamber. "We must put this matter to rest. Humans are an anomaly, a species that stumbled into the stars, wielding crude technology and primitive instincts. They fear war. They cling to peace because they know they cannot survive true conflict." There were nods of agreement from many council members. The Ryzak, a species resembling skeletal canines, barked in amusement. The Zalkor, a race of sentient gas clouds, pulsed in approval. Humans had been a thorn in the side of the Galactic Council ever since they discovered FTL travel. Unlike other species who had petitioned for entry, begging to be part of the interstellar order, humans had been difficult. They rejected regulations, refused to abandon their chaotic ways, and worst of all, they had opinions. Opinions they voiced loudly. Ambassador Elias Carter, humanity's lone representative, sat calmly at his station. He was an older man, sharp-eyed but weary. He had sat through years of these meetings, listening to the same rhetoric. The High Chancellor continued. "Humanity will be warned one final time. They will submit to the Council's governance, or they will be—" A sudden, sharp noise cut through the chamber. A laugh. Carter exhaled, shaking his head. A mistake. He hadn't meant to, but the absurdity of it all had finally broken through his restraint. The room went silent. Hundreds of alien eyes turned toward him. "Do you find this amusing, Ambassador Carter?" Vorthax's mandibles twitched in irritation. Carter straightened. "I just find it funny, Chancellor. You say humans fear war, that we cling to peace because we can't survive it." He leaned forward, hands clasped together. "Let me ask you a question. Do any of you know what happens when humans go to war?" The silence was palpable. Carter smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think we fear war? We hate war. There's a difference. We hate it because we know what we are capable of when it starts." Vorthax clicked his mandibles in irritation. "Bluster. Humanity's record shows that your wars are frequent and senseless. Your history is filled with destruction for petty reasons. This only proves your inferiority." Carter shook his head. "You don't get it. Other species go to war for resources, for power, for expansion. But when humans fight, when we truly commit to war, we don't stop until we've turned the enemy to dust. We wage total war, no half measures, no mercy. We adapt, we endure, and we break our enemies in ways they don't even understand until it's too late." A tense silence spread through the chamber. A few members shifted uncomfortably. "Are you threatening us, Ambassador?" Carter exhaled slowly. "No, Chancellor. I'm warning you." A murmur of laughter rippled through the chamber. The Ryzak delegate sneered, a guttural growl escaping its throat. "You speak as if we should fear a backwater race of primitives. You have no fleets, no warships, no armies. Your people have never seen a true intergalactic conflict. What do you have that could possibly make us afraid?" Carter glanced at his datapad. A notification blinked on the screen. They had received the message. It was done. He smiled, this time genuinely. "Oh, I think you'll find out soon enough." Across the vastness of space, the first human warships decloaked above the capital world of the Galactic Council. They had been waiting in the system for days, watching, calculating. And now they were done waiting. The first missiles launched, and the Galactic Council learned the truth about humanity. The first explosion shattered the illusion of peace. The Galactic Council's capital world, Vorlune 5, had never known war. It was the beating heart of the civilized galaxy, a planet where negotiations, diplomacy, and treaties had replaced the crude violence of lesser species. But that changed the moment the first human warheads detonated in orbit. The council chamber trembled. The glow of artificial starlight flickered, replaced by the harsh red glare of emergency alarms. Delegates cried out in alarm as the entire structure rumbled beneath them. High Chancellor Vorthax's mandibles twitched in shock. His compound eyes darted toward the vast holographic display in the center of the chamber. It now showed a terrifying sight. Dozens of human warships emerging from the void, weapons systems active. What is the meaning of this? Ambassador Elias Carter remained seated, calm as ever. His hands were folded neatly on the table, but there was something in his gaze. Something cold and unyielding. You wanted an answer, he said. Now you have it. Another explosion rocked the surface of Vorlune 5. The planetary defense grid had barely activated before human strike teams began systematically dismantling it. Laser turrets went offline. Shield generators exploded in plumes of fire. Humans had studied the Council's security systems, and now, with surgical precision, they were tearing through them. The room descended into chaos. The Ryzak delegate bared his fangs in rage. "This is an act of war! You humans are insane!" Carter chuckled. "We're just efficient." Vorthax slammed a clawed fist against the podium. "This is madness. Humanity has never been a threat to the Council. You lack the military strength to—" The doors of the chamber burst open. Council guards, armed with plasma rifles, stormed in, escorting a new arrival. A figure clad in sleek black armor, the insignia of Earth's Unified Fleet Command displayed proudly on his chest. Admiral Nathaniel Graves. He was an imposing figure, his presence exuding a quiet authority that demanded attention. His uniform was unblemished, his dark eyes calculating. He surveyed the room, then turned toward Carter. "It's done," Graves said. Carter nodded. "Losses?" "Minimal. Defense grid neutralized. The planetary fleet is surrendering." Vorthax's eyes widened in horror. "Impossible!" But the proof was all around them. The trembling of the chamber, the alarms, the smoke rising from the cityscape beyond the great glass windows. Admiral Graves turned toward the council members. His voice was measured, but there was no mistaking the steel behind his words. "We did not come here to negotiate," he said. "For years, the Council has mocked humanity, ignored us, treated us like children at your table. You assumed we were weak because we did not seek war." He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the assembled delegates. "That was your mistake." Carter leaned back, watching as the room finally grasped the situation. "Humans don't start wars," he said, "but we end them." A hologram flickered to life beside Graves, a live feed from Vorlune 5's orbital station. It showed the Council's own fleets, hundreds of ships, their weapons offline, their crews surrendering to human forces. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Then, Carter spoke again. "You called us primitive. You called us fearful. But you never stopped to ask yourselves why we avoided war." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "It's not because we fear it. It's because we know what happens when we embrace it." Graves turned toward the High Chancellor. "Your capital is under our control. Your fleets are in our custody. Your world is at our mercy." Vorthax's mandibles twitched, his body frozen in disbelief. Carter exhaled slowly. Now, Chancellor, let's talk about new terms. War had come to the Galactic Council, and they had never been more afraid. Smoke curled into the sky above Vorlon 5. What had once been the pristine capital of the Galactic Council now bore the scars of war. A war they never saw coming. The once invincible planetary defenses were gone. The Council's fleets, which had stood as a symbol of universal peace, now floated in orbit, powerless, their crews detained by human forces. Inside the Council chamber, the silence was thick with unspoken fear. Admiral Graves stood at the center of the room, his gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Many of them, creatures of power and arrogance just hours ago, now trembled in their seats. They had spent centuries dictating the laws of the galaxy. Now, they were at the mercy of humans. Graves turned his attention to High Chancellor Vorthax. The once imposing leader of the Council now looked small. His mandibles twitched as his claws gripped the podium. "You can't do this," Vorthax said, his voice lacking its usual authority. The Council is over," Graves interrupted, his tone flat, absolute. It failed. It believed war was a relic of the past, that peace was the natural order of things. He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You were wrong." Carter, still seated, let out a slow breath. "For years, we warned you. We tried diplomacy. We played by your rules, and every time you mocked us, treated us like children, you thought we feared war." He shook his head. "But the truth is, we feared what we would have to become if war ever found us." Vorthax bared his fangs. "You think you can just take control? Humanity is one species. The rest of the galaxy will rise against you." Graves smirked. "You still don't get it, do you?" A hologram flickered to life above the chamber, showing dozens of alien fleets across the galaxy. Some were mobilizing, but not for war, for surrender. The humans hadn't just attacked Vorlon 5. Their forces had struck simultaneously at multiple key locations: Council-controlled shipyards, communication hubs, and military strongholds. It had taken them mere hours to dismantle centuries of intergalactic power. The room erupted in panic. Council members shouted over one another, their voices filled with desperation. The reality was sinking in. They hadn't just lost a battle. They had lost the war before they even knew it had begun. Vorthax's claws clenched. "You will never be accepted as rulers of the galaxy. The other species will resist." Carter let out a short laugh. "We don't want to rule the galaxy, Chancellor. That's what you still don't understand. Humanity doesn't need an empire." He gestured toward the hologram. "We don't need to force anyone to accept our terms, because they've already chosen to." Graves nodded. "The moment your fleets fell, the truth became clear to every species in the Council. Their leaders failed them. They put their faith in a system that was built on illusion, the illusion that war would never return." His expression darkened. "But war is the natural state of the universe, and humanity? We mastered it." The Ryzak delegate slammed a fist onto the table. "Then what do you want? If not power, then what?" Graves turned toward Carter, who exhaled and finally stood. He walked slowly to the center of the chamber, his steps echoing in the silence. "We want order," Carter said. Vorthax let out a sharp hiss. "That's what the Council provided." Carter's eyes flashed with something dark. "Number. That's what you pretended to provide. The Council was never about peace. It was about control. You kept weaker species in line through bureaucracy, through regulations that benefited the powerful while ensuring others remained stagnant." He took another step forward. "You talk about fear, Chancellor. But it was never humans who feared war." His gaze swept across the room. "It was all of you. He gestured toward the shattered world outside. And when you finally poked the sleeping bear, when you finally saw what humanity could do, you realized the truth. A heavy silence settled over the room. Humanity had been underestimated. Now the galaxy would never make that mistake again. Graves turned to Vorthax. His voice was steady, final. The Council is finished. From this moment forward, the galaxy will operate under a new system, one that doesn't ignore reality. He took a step back, crossing his arms. Now, Chancellor, you have two choices. Vorthax swallowed hard. What choices? Carter's smile returned, sharp, merciless. Cooperate, or be an example. The Galactic Council had ruled for centuries. In a single day, it was erased. And the universe finally understood what humans truly were. Not conquerors, not diplomats, not cowards. Humans were survivors, and when pushed, they became something far worse. The weight of humanity's ultimatum hung over the chamber like a storm cloud. No one spoke, no one moved. High Chancellor Vorthax, once the most powerful being in the galaxy, sat frozen. His mandibles twitched, his clawed hands gripping the podium so tightly that cracks formed along its surface. The other delegates, the proud leaders of species that had shaped the universe, avoided his gaze. Because they all knew the truth. The Galactic Council was finished. What would cooperation entail? Vorthax's voice was barely above a whisper. Admiral Graves tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. It means humanity will oversee the transition to a new order. The Council's authority is revoked, effective immediately. A murmur of fear spread through the chamber. The Zal Kor delegate, a creature of shifting, luminous gases, pulsed anxiously. And if we refuse? Carter's voice was soft, almost casual. Then you'll learn what happens when humans stop holding back. Vorthax's eyes darted toward the holographic projection. The footage of Vorlon V's orbital fleet still played in real time. His once mighty warships, symbols of the Council's strength, were now lined up, powerless, under the control of humanity's forces. The reality was undeniable. You planned this, Vorthax rasped. His voice was hoarse with disbelief. You set this up for years. Carter finally sighed. Of course we did. A new hologram flickered to life. It was Earth. But not as the Council had ever seen it before. For decades, the Council had believed humans were little more than a minor species. Capable of some advancements, sure, but nothing compared to the great empires of the cosmos. They had seen Earth as a thriving but unremarkable world, an isolated civilization that had just barely scratched the surface of space travel. But that wasn't what the hologram showed now. The projection revealed a network of hidden orbital shipyards, colossal construction facilities that had never been registered with the Council. Dotted along the dark side of the moon, buried under the storms of Jupiter, concealed in the asteroid belt. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, and within those shipyards, fleets, massive black-armored warships, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Some of them dwarfed the Council's largest battleships. Others bristled with weapons that the universe didn't even have classifications for yet. It was not the fleet of a primitive species. It was the fleet of a civilization that had prepared for this moment for a very, very long time. The entire chamber stared in stunned horror. Carter folded his arms. Did you really think we were just floating through space, hoping for the best? His voice carried an edge of amusement. Number. The moment we realized how the Council saw us, how you belittled us, how you dismissed us, we understood what needed to be done. He gestured towards the hologram. You thought we feared war. You thought we couldn't handle it. But in reality, we've been waiting. The Zal Kor delegate stammered, their gaseous form flickering wildly. But the regulations, we never followed them. Admiral Graves finally spoke, his tone like iron on stone. For years, we let you believe we were weak, that we were scattered, disorganized, that our fleets were small, that we had no real military force. He let the words settle. But that was a lie. A new projection appeared beside him, a recorded video feed taken from a Council intelligence drone, one that had infiltrated human space years ago. It showed military training facilities unlike anything the Council had. Endless stretches of land, where human soldiers trained in conditions so brutal, no other species could have survived them. Urban warfare simulations, harsh planetary environments, zero-gravity combat drills, and most horrifying of all, weapons testing. Weapons the galaxy had no defense against. Carter turned back to Vorthax. We knew this day would come, and when it did, he smiled, cold and merciless. We made sure we'd be the ones to finish it. Vorthax was shaking now. The mighty Galactic Council, the ruling power of the cosmos for centuries, had been outplayed, outmatched, and outmaneuvered by the very species they had looked down upon. You were never in control, Graves said, his voice calm and final. You just thought you were. Silence. Then, slowly, the Ryzak delegate, one of the most vicious, warlike species in the Council, stood up and bowed. His canine-like snout lowered in submission. A moment later, the Zalcor delegate did the same. Then another, and another. Within minutes, every single delegate in the room had bowed before humanity. Vorthax remained standing, his body trembling with fury, with humiliation. He hated them. He hated that they had been so blind, that they had never seen this coming. But he hated one thing even more. The fact that, deep down, he now understood why humans were feared, and why, from this day forward, the galaxy would never, ever challenge them again. The chamber remained silent, thick with the weight of a new reality. The Galactic Council was no longer the dominant force of the universe. Humanity had shattered that illusion. Vorthax stood frozen, his mind a storm of disbelief and seething rage. He had spent centuries securing the galactic order, ensuring that war remained a relic of the past. But now, war had returned, and it had a human face. You think you've won, he rasped, his mandibles clicking together as he forced himself to meet Carter's gaze. But you don't understand what you've just done. You may have taken Vorlon 5, but you've made enemies across the entire galaxy. The independent factions, the warlords, the rogue empires, they will never bow to you. Carter exhaled, shaking his head. I keep hearing this same tired argument from you, Chancellor. His voice remained level, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface. And every time, you fail to grasp the situation. He took a step forward. You think we want them to bow? He let the question hang in the air. Number, we want them to fight. A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. The Zalcor delegate shifted uneasily. You want more war? Graves spoke this time. You misunderstand. His voice was calm, deliberate. Humanity doesn't seek war for the sake of conquest, but if war is inevitable, we believe in finishing it completely. He stepped toward the central hologram and gestured, bringing up new data streams, intelligence reports that no one in the chamber should have had access to. The room tensed as the information scrolled across the screen. Every major criminal empire, every hidden warlord faction, every rogue fleet that operated outside the Council's influence. The Council had never been able to stop them. Their influence had ended at the edge of negotiation tables. Humanity, however, they had already tracked them all down. This is impossible, Vorthax muttered. You have intelligence on factions we haven't been able to locate for centuries. Carter smirked. Well, maybe that's because we don't negotiate with them. He flicked his wrist. and a second projection appeared. It showed battle footage, but not from Vorlon 5. Across the galaxy, at this very moment, human strike teams were already hitting key warlord territories. The dreaded Skari pirate lords, neutralized. The infamous Bloodfang marauders, crushed before they even knew what hit them. The ruthless Korth Dominion, a splinter empire that had defied the Council for generations. Their fleet was burning. It had all been happening simultaneously. The Council thought humanity had only attacked them, but humans had waged war on the entire underbelly of the galaxy. At once. Vorthax's legs nearly buckled. How did you coordinate this? Graves tilted his head slightly. You assumed we were just now revealing our strength. But the truth is, we've been working in the shadows for years. You didn't see our ships because they were never in open space. You didn't see our soldiers because they were already behind enemy lines. Carter smiled. You spent decades looking down on us, and we spent decades digging graves for the warlords you were too weak to stop. A new broadcast appeared on the hologram, this one from a live news channel across the galaxy. Species across the cosmos were watching it unfold in real time. They saw the pirate fleets burning. They saw the corrupt warlords dying in sudden coordinated assassinations. They saw the hidden underworld of the galaxy collapsing in mere hours. And they saw who was responsible. The humans. Carter turned back to Vorthax, watching the last remnants of his arrogance crumble. This is what you never understood, Carter said. His voice was almost gentle now, like a teacher explaining something to a slow student. You ruled through bureaucracy, through laws that criminals ignored, through a peace that only worked because no one challenged it. He took a step forward, his gaze locking onto Vorthax's trembling form. But peace isn't given. His voice lowered. Peace is enforced. The chamber was dead silent. The Rizak delegate, who had once mocked humanity, stood slowly. His sharp, wolf-like eyes were filled with something that wasn't fear anymore. It was respect. And then, he spoke. The Council was weak. It failed. He turned toward Carter and Graves. Humanity has proven its strength, and I will stand beside it. Whispers spread through the chamber. One by one, the remaining delegates stood, pledging their allegiance. The Council was dead, and humanity had just reshaped the entire galaxy. Vorthax collapsed into his chair, defeated, broken. He had spent centuries believing humans were inferior. Now he realized the truth. Humanity had never feared war. They had simply been waiting for the rest of the galaxy to catch up. The Galactic Council was dead. Not in name alone, but in purpose, in spirit, in the authority it once wielded over the cosmos. Humanity had smashed it apart in a single, calculated stroke. But taking power was one thing. Holding it? Another entirely. Vorlon 5, once a pristine beacon of diplomacy, was now occupied. The flag of the unified Terran Federation flew over its capital. Human warships hovered in low orbit, keeping watch over the shattered remains of the old order. Admiral Graves stood atop the Council's grand balcony, the highest point of the city. From here, he could see the skyline. Smoke rising from pockets of resistance. The shattered remnants of once glorious council buildings. It was a symbol of a new era. You know this won't be easy. Carter stepped beside him, the ever-calm diplomat watching the city below. Graves exhaled, his expression unreadable. Nothing worth doing ever is. A cold wind cut through the balcony. Below, human troops moved with precise efficiency, securing government buildings and rounding up former council leaders who had refused to surrender. Some fought, some fled, but none escaped the inevitable. We didn't come here to rule, Carter said after a moment. Graves nodded. No, we didn't. But we also can't just walk away. The moment we do, the galaxy will tear itself apart. That was the reality of it. The Council had held everything together, no matter how flawed it had been. Without it, there would be chaos, power vacuums, rogue factions seeking to fill the void, and even though humanity had dismantled the old order, they now found themselves in an even more dangerous position. They had become the new center of power, and now the entire galaxy was watching them. Across the cosmos, the shockwaves of humanity's victory were still unfolding. Some species rejoiced. For the first time in history, the corrupt elite of the Galactic Council had been toppled. Planets that had once been ignored, left to suffer under bureaucracy and indifference, saw hope in humanity's rise. On worlds where the Council had failed to protect its people, there were celebrations in the streets. The old order had been shattered, and many believed that humanity would bring something better. But there were others who saw only terror. The remaining warlords and rogue states didn't celebrate, they panicked. The criminal underworld had thrived under the Council's corruption, and now their empires were collapsing as humans hunted them down one by one. Entire fleets fled into deep space, hoping to escape humanity's wrath. And some, in desperation, began forging new alliances. "They're consolidating," said Colonel Harlow, an intelligence officer who had just arrived from Earth. He stood in the newly established Human Command Center, deep within the Council's former government district. He flicked his wrist, bringing up a holographic display of the galaxy. Red markers blinked across multiple sectors, factions preparing for war. The remnants of the Korth Dominion, the Skari holdouts, and at least 3 independent warlords are forming a coalition, Harlow continued. They're calling themselves the Vanguard Compact. Carter raised an eyebrow. Dramatic. "They're desperate," Graves muttered. "They know they can't fight us alone, so now they're trying to do the one thing criminals have never been good at, unifying." Harlow zoomed in on a sector at the edge of the galaxy. "We intercepted a transmission. The Vanguard Compact has chosen their new stronghold, Kelros 9. Graves studied the display. "How well defended?" "Heavily. They're pulling everything they have to fortify it. We estimate thousands of ships, planetary defenses, and ground troops." A brief silence passed. Then Carter sighed. "Do we need to handle them, or do we let them be?" Graves didn't hesitate. "We handle them. Swiftly, brutally, completely." Harlow nodded. "A preemptive strike, then?" Graves folded his arms. "Number not just a strike." His eyes darkened. "An example." Carter exhaled slowly. He knew this was necessary. If they showed any hesitation now, the galaxy would descend into endless war. Humanity had ended the first war. Now they had to prevent the next one. Graves turned toward Harlow. "Mobilize the fleets. Inform the generals. We move on Kelros 9 immediately." Humanity had proven its strength. Now it was time to remind the galaxy why they feared it. The sky above Kelros 9 burned. Humanity had arrived. From the moment the Terran Armada emerged from hyperspace, the battle was inevitable. The Vanguard Compact, desperate and cornered, had thrown everything they had into fortifying this world. Thousands of ships, pirate cruisers, black market dreadnoughts, and stolen Council battleships formed a desperate blockade. They had one chance to hold the line, but against humanity, that chance was an illusion. Admiral Graves stood at the command deck of the UTS Warborn, a dreadnought unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human warships weren't designed for posturing or diplomatic deterrence. They were weapons of annihilation, built for war and nothing else. And now that war had begun. "Status?" Graves asked, his voice calm. A fleet officer turned from his station. "Enemy ships holding formation, sir. Their lead vessels are trying to establish comms." Graves smirked. "Let them talk. It won't matter." The screen flickered to life, revealing a haggard-looking alien warlord, a Korthian, his scaled face twisted in rage. "You madmen don't understand what you've done! You can't wipe us all out!" Graves tilted his head. "We're not wiping you out," he said, his voice cold as steel. "We're correcting a mistake." The Korthian bared his fangs. "If you come for us, humanity will be known as tyrants. Do you want the galaxy to see you as butchers?" Graves let out a slow breath. "The galaxy feared war," he said. "We ended the last one before it could begin." His gaze sharpened. "Now, we're ensuring there won't be another." He turned to his officers. "Fire." The first volley struck like an act of God. Human weapons weren't just stronger, they were smarter. They anticipated the enemy's movements, guided by battlefield AI that outmatched anything the Council had ever conceived. In seconds, the Vanguard Compact's first line of ships vanished, engulfed in nuclear fire, plasma bursts, and kinetic rounds traveling at relativistic speeds. Panic spread through the enemy ranks. They had fortified Kelros 9, thinking it would be a sanctuary. Instead, they had built themselves a tomb. The Terran Armada advanced. On the surface of Kelros 9, alarms screamed as human drop pods rained down from the sky like falling meteors. Inside each pod, elite human shock troopers sat in grim silence. Men and women trained from birth for war. Soldiers who had been forged in environments too brutal for any other species to survive. As their pods slammed into the battlefield, the doors burst open, and the storm began. Humanity had arrived, and there would be no survivors. Carter watched from orbit as the planet below was systematically dismantled. The Vanguard Compact's last stronghold was dying. It had taken less than an hour for the largest criminal empire in the galaxy to fall. He turned to Graves. "The survivors?" Graves didn't blink. "There won't be any." Carter exhaled. He knew it had to be this way. The only way to ensure peace was to leave no one left to challenge it. The war wasn't won in battles. It was won in the fear that followed them. And now the galaxy knew. If you stood against humanity, you didn't just lose. You ceased to exist. Kelros 9 burned for 3 days. When it was over, the last enemies of humanity were gone. The war was over. And the galaxy now belonged to humans. The fires of Kelros 9 had long since died. The war was over. The Vanguard Compact was gone. The last true threats to humanity's rule had been erased from existence. And now, the galaxy held its breath. Vorlon 5, once the capital of the Galactic Council, had become the seat of a new order. The banners of the unified Terran Federation now hung over the great halls where the old rulers once dictated policy. But humanity did not rebuild the Council. They had no interest in another bureaucratic monstrosity filled with corruption, delay, and useless diplomacy. Instead, the galaxy now operated under a new system, one dictated not by endless negotiation, but by order. Human order. Carter stood in the former council chamber, now repurposed into the command center of the Galactic Stabilization Initiative. He wasn't alone. Representatives from dozens of species sat in tense silence. Leaders of planets and civilizations that had once feared humanity, now forced to acknowledge their power. At the center of it all, Admiral Graves sat with his usual unshakable presence. Carter took a breath. Now came the hard part. "You all know why you're here," Carter began. His voice was calm but firm. "The war is over, the Council is gone, and the galaxy must now move forward." A murmur passed through the room. The Zalcor delegate, still shifting anxiously, spoke first. "Under whose rule?" Graves leaned forward. "Ours." The tension thickened. "So humanity truly seeks an empire," growled the Ryzak war chief. "You claim you didn't come to rule, yet here we are." Carter shook his head. "You misunderstand. Humanity doesn't seek dominion. We seek stability. He gestured to the holographic display. It showed the galaxy as it now stood, united under a single military presence, with no factions left to challenge the new status quo. For the first time in history, war had truly ended. For centuries, Carter continued, the Council let chaos fester. They convinced themselves that war was a relic of the past, that diplomacy could solve everything, and in doing so, they let monsters thrive. His gaze swept over the room. Humanity corrected that mistake, and we will ensure that mistake is never made again. The Zalcor delegate hesitated. And what if another warlord rises? Another faction that seeks to break this peace? Graves' expression didn't change. Then we do what humans do best, he said. We end it. Cold silence. They all understood. Humanity wasn't interested in ruling every aspect of the galaxy. They had no interest in controlling every planet, every law, every civilian government. But the moment anyone threatened peace, humanity would return, and they would erase the threat before it had a chance to grow. This was no empire. This was the iron will of a species that had mastered war. Carter glanced at Graves. The mission was complete. The galaxy had feared war for centuries, and now the galaxy feared humanity, not because they sought power, but because they had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were the only ones who truly understood how to wield it. And so, the age of the Terran peace began. Not built on empty words, not built on fragile treaties, but built on the absolute certainty that if war ever threatened the stars again, humanity would return, and this time they wouldn't leave anything behind. The war had already been raging for over a decade. The Dominion, an empire spanning thousands of star systems, had crushed every species that stood in their way. Their fleets were vast, their technology unmatched, and their warriors relentless. They had conquered entire civilizations without breaking a sweat, their dominance unquestioned. And then, they met humans. To the Dominion, humanity was just another insignificant species, another primitive civilization to be assimilated or eradicated. They attacked Earth with the same cold efficiency that had worked countless times before. Their fleets darkened the skies, their plasma weapons burned entire cities to the ground, and their war machines slaughtered millions. But humanity did not break. Instead, something terrifying happened. Instead of surrendering, humans did what no other species had dared to do. They fought back with everything they had, not just weapons, but with something far more dangerous. Their will, their ingenuity, their sheer, unrelenting refusal to accept defeat. It started with small things. Guerrilla warfare in the ruins of once great cities. Soldiers who refused to die even when their bodies should have given up. Pilots who took on entire squadrons alone and won. Engineers who turned scraps of metal into weapons that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The Dominion expected humanity to collapse in months. It had been years now, and instead of dwindling, humanity was becoming stronger. They weren't just resisting, they were adapting, learning, and countering every strategy thrown at them. Aboard the Dominion's command vessel, High Warlord Vec craned his neck toward the massive galactic display, his tendrils twitching in irritation. The latest reports were troubling. Another Dominion supply line had been severed, another warship ambushed and destroyed by what should have been an inferior enemy. He couldn't comprehend it. The humans should have been on their knees by now, begging for mercy. Instead, they were laughing. He had seen the intercepted transmissions. The humans had a phrase, one they repeated in every battle report, every desperate mission, every impossible situation. "I'll handle it." It made no sense. The words were simple, but the tone they were delivered with, cold, confident, almost casual, was unnerving. It didn't matter if a human soldier was outnumbered 100-1, if a colony was on the verge of destruction, if a fleet was facing annihilation. Somewhere, a human would shrug and say those words. "I'll handle it." And somehow they always did. Vec's mandibles clacked together in frustration as he turned to his second-in-command. "What does it mean?" The officer shifted uneasily, his spines pressing flat against his carapace. "It is difficult to explain, High Warlord," Vec growled. "Try." The officer hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Humans have this belief, a confidence that borders on insanity. When they say those words, it means they are about to do something reckless, impossible, and somehow they succeed." Vec exhaled sharply. "Superstition, arrogance, it will not save them." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Because right now, a single human was about to prove him wrong. Again. On a barren, war-torn moon orbiting the Dominion's key supply world, Captain Dorian Reyes crouched behind a wrecked tank, his rifle held steady as he surveyed the battlefield. The Dominion's forces were swarming the outpost, thousands of them, their insectoid bodies glistening under the red light of the twin suns. His platoon was outnumbered 10-1, their defenses crumbling. His lieutenant glanced at him, eyes filled with uncertainty. "Sir, we need to fall back. There's no way we're holding this position." Dorian exhaled slowly, adjusting his rifle. "Yeah, no." "Sir?" Dorian smirked. "I'll handle it." And that was it. No elaborate plan, no backup, no reinforcements. Just those words. He tapped his comms. "Command, this is Reyes. I need an orbital strike at my position." A brief pause. Then the voice of his commander, General Foster, came through. "You're in the middle of it, Captain. You won't survive." Dorian's grin widened. "Yeah, I know. Send it anyway." Silence. Then a chuckle. "All right, Reyes, you crazy bastard." Above the moon, high in orbit, a human warship adjusted its trajectory. Cannons hummed to life. The Dominion ground forces below detected the energy buildup a second too late, and then the sky came down in fire. The Dominion forces barely had time to scream before the entire battlefield was engulfed in a blinding explosion. The shockwave tore through everything, sending debris flying, bodies disintegrating. At the very center of the blast zone, as dust and smoke settled, a single figure stood, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Dorian Reyes wiped the blood from his forehead, cracked his neck, and picked up his rifle. The outpost was saved. He tapped his comms again. "Told you I'd handle it." And somewhere, on a Dominion command ship, a high warlord felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The Dominion had never known fear. They were the conquerors, the ones who crushed resistance before it could even begin. They had reduced civilizations to dust, shattered empires, and rewritten history in their name. But now, for the first time, fear crept into the edges of their war councils. Reports from the battlefield had become erratic, chaotic, filled with stories that shouldn't have been possible. A single human soldier taking down an entire strike team. A fleet of outdated ships outmaneuvering state-of-the-art Dominion warcraft. An entire outpost held against impossible odds because one human decided it wasn't time to lose yet. And always, always, before the tide turned, the humans would say it. "I'll handle it." High Warlord Vec was done underestimating them. He stood at the command deck of his warship, his eyes fixed on the glowing battlefield reports. The humans were like a virus, spreading their defiance wherever they went. He had to end this war before their madness infected the rest of the galaxy. "Deploy the Titan fleet," Vec ordered, his voice sharp. His second-in-command stiffened. "High Warlord, the Titan fleet has not been fully prepared for—" "Enough!" Vec snapped. His mandibles clicked in agitation. They have survived because we have not given them the full force of the Dominion. No more skirmishes. No more underestimating. We will erase humanity from existence. The Titan fleet was the Dominion's ultimate weapon. Massive warships, each the size of a moon, armed with planet-cracking cannons and near-impenetrable defenses. They had only been deployed once before, against a species that no longer existed. The humans would burn. Dorian Reyes sat in the cockpit of his stolen Dominion fighter, adjusting the controls with one hand and checking his wounds with the other. His ribs ached, his arm was barely functional, and his uniform was torn and covered in dried blood. But he was alive. And in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. He had stolen the fighter in the chaos of the orbital strike, using the confusion to slip past enemy forces. Now he was heading straight toward the Dominion's supply fleet. If he could cripple it, humanity would have a chance to push forward. His comms crackled to life. "Reyes, do you copy?" Dorian smirked at the familiar voice. "Loud and clear, General." "You are one stubborn son of a bitch," General Foster said, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and relief. "I assume you've got another crazy plan?" Dorian checked his scanner. The Dominion supply fleet was 2 jumps away. He had 1 fighter, half a tank of fuel, and an old Dominion officer's uniform stuffed in the cockpit. "Yeah," he said. "I'll handle it." A long pause, then a sigh. "Why do I even ask?" Dorian grinned. "Because it always works." The Dominion supply fleet was massive, a convoy of heavily guarded transport ships carrying weapons, fuel, and reinforcements to the front lines. Dorian slipped into formation, his stolen fighter blending seamlessly with the others. The Dominion's reliance on protocol and rigid structure was their greatest strength, and their greatest weakness. They didn't expect creativity. They didn't expect improvisation. And they sure as hell didn't expect someone like Dorian Reyes. He accessed the fighter's command console, bypassing the security locks with stolen access codes. A few keystrokes, and he was in. The supply fleet's security grid flickered. The automatic threat detection system shut down. The Dominion warships watching over the convoy went blind for exactly 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds, Dorian did the unthinkable. He transmitted false orders directly to the Dominion captains. Priority override. All transports are to reroute to Sector 14B for emergency resupply. Immediate compliance required. A moment of hesitation. Then, one by one, the massive transport ships began veering off course. Dorian exhaled slowly. The Dominion's reliance on hierarchy was laughable. They followed orders blindly, never questioning, never adapting. And now their entire supply fleet was headed straight into an ambush. High Warlord Vec watched the reports with growing rage. "What is happening?" he snarled. The officer stammered. "Our supply fleet. It has changed course. Orders were issued from—" He hesitated, his tendrils twitching nervously. "From your command, High Warlord." Vec's eyes burned with fury. "I issued no such orders." Then realization dawned. The humans. They had infiltrated his fleet. They had turned his own ships against him. And somewhere out there, he knew, a single human was grinning as he whispered those cursed words. "I'll handle it." The Dominion supply fleet was flying straight into a nightmare, as the massive transport ships unknowingly rerouted to Sector 14B. Humanity was already waiting for them. Cloaked warships hovered in the asteroid belt, their engines running cold, weapons primed. Fighters lined up in perfect formation, hidden in the debris fields, engines off to avoid detection. They had one chance. One moment to strike before the Dominion realized the mistake. General Foster sat aboard the UNS Retribution, watching the supply fleet inch closer. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, finally, The Dominion ships crossed the threshold. Foster took a breath. "All units," he said. "Light them up." Space ignited. A storm of missiles, railgun fire, and high-energy blasts tore through the Dominion's unshielded transports. The first ship exploded instantly, breaking apart in a fireball that sent debris flying. The second took direct hits to its fuel reserves, detonating like a miniature sun. In an instant, the ambush was absolute. Dorian Reyes watched from his stolen Dominion fighter, a smirk forming on his lips. "Beautiful," he muttered, gripping the controls. He gunned the engine, breaking formation and diving toward one of the remaining transports. The Dominion finally realized the trap. Fighters scrambled from the remaining ships, trying to form a defensive perimeter. But it was already too late. Dorian wove through the chaos, his stolen ship giving him the perfect disguise. He opened fire, blasting apart a Dominion escort before it could get its shields online. His comms crackled as another pilot, Lieutenant Vasquez, hailed him. "Reyes, I swear if you don't die today, I'm buying you a drink." Dorian chuckled. "I like whiskey. Expensive whiskey." "I hate you." "I know." With a sharp turn, Dorian locked onto the largest transport in the fleet, one of the Dominion's primary ammunition haulers. If they could take it out, the enemy front lines would be crippled. But the Dominion wasn't going down without a fight. A massive warship, nearly 3 kilometers long, emerged from the shadow of a nearby moon, its hull bristling with weapons. It was a Titan-class dreadnought, one of the Dominion's deadliest war machines. Dorian's smirk faded. Well, that complicated things. On the Dominion flagship, High Warlord Vec's mandibles twisted in fury. "Deploy all forces," he growled. "Destroy the humans. Burn their fleet to ashes." His officers scrambled to obey, but inside, Vec felt something gnawing at him. This wasn't how battles were supposed to go. The Dominion struck first, crushed their enemies, and moved on. But now they were reacting, being outplayed. And the worst part? One human had done this. One. It was impossible. It was madness. It was terrifying. But it was real. And Vec had the sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Dorian Reyes stared at the incoming Titan-class warship, his fingers tightening on the controls. The Dominion didn't play fair. Good. Neither did he. He opened his comms to the fleet. "All right, listen up. We need to take down that dreadnought or we're all screwed. Any bright ideas?" Silence. Then Vasquez sighed. "You're going to do something stupid, aren't you?" Dorian grinned. "Always." He flipped the fighter into a tight spin, accelerating straight toward the dreadnought. Alarms blared inside the cockpit as targeting systems locked onto him. Plasma turrets swiveled, preparing to blast him out of existence. But Dorian had no intention of dying today. He punched the afterburners, weaving through the incoming fire, dodging explosions by inches. The dreadnought's shields flared as he skimmed the surface, flying so close he could see the seams in the metal plating. Then he saw it. A docking bay. Still open, still receiving transports. Perfect. "Vasquez," he said, grinning like a madman. "Tell my mom I love her." "Reyes." He cut the comms and dove straight into the docking bay. The docking bay loomed ahead, a gaping maw in the side of the dreadnought. Dozens of Dominion fighters were landing and taking off in perfect regimented order, until Dorian Reyes ruined everything. His stolen fighter rocketed into the bay at full speed, dodging incoming ships by inches. Sirens blared as Dominion pilots scrambled out of the way, their systems struggling to register an unauthorized entry. Dorian grinned. "Showtime." At the last second, he ejected. His seat blasted upward, flipping him through the artificial gravity barrier at the docking bay's entrance. His fighter, however, kept going, straight into a row of parked Dominion ships. The resulting explosion was magnificent. Fire and debris ripped through the bay, engulfing anything that wasn't bolted down. Fighters toppled like dominoes, their fuel reserves igniting. The hangar turned into a battlefield in an instant. Dorian landed hard, rolling across the deck before coming to a stop. His head throbbed, his ribs protested, but he was alive. That was good enough. "All right," he muttered, groaning as he pushed himself up. "Step 1, infiltrate the ship. Step 2, don't die." A squad of Dominion soldiers spotted him, their weapons snapped up, their insectoid bodies moving in perfect coordination. Dorian gave them a lazy salute. "Hey there." They opened fire. He dove behind a stack of crates, bullets, and plasma bolts slamming into the metal. Reaching to his belt, he grabbed a Dominion shock grenade, one of the many souvenirs he had picked up over the years. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it over the crates. The soldiers barely had time to react before the grenade detonated, sending an electrical surge through their armor. They collapsed, twitching violently. Dorian smirked. "Step 2, check." He snatched a rifle from one of the unconscious soldiers and bolted toward the nearest corridor. He had no idea where he was going, but that was never a problem before. All he needed to do was cause as much chaos as possible. High Warlord Vec was furious. His dreadnought, the pride of the Dominion fleet, was under attack, from the inside. He stormed onto the bridge, his officers scrambling at their stations. "Report," an aide stammered. "Heish, High Warlord, we have an intruder." "I know that already," Vec snapped. His claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "One human should not be able to infiltrate a Titan-class warship." The officer hesitated. "With respect, High Warlord, this is not just any human." Vec's mandibles clicked together in frustration. The name had been circulating in war reports for months. Reyes, a soldier, a saboteur, a nightmare in human form. And he was here, on his ship. Vec's claws tightened. "Seal every bulkhead. Deploy security drones. Flood the lower decks with nerve gas. I want that human dead." The officer nodded and relayed the orders. But Vec had a sinking feeling that none of it would work. Because if there was one thing he had learned about humans, it was this. When they said, "I'll handle it," the war was already over. Dorian sprinted down the corridors as sirens blared around him. Doors slammed shut ahead, bulkheads sealing in an attempt to trap him. Too bad for them. He skidded to a stop and grabbed another grenade from his belt, this one a shaped charge. Slapping it onto the door, he took a few steps back and pressed the detonator. The explosion rocked the hallway, and the door crumpled inward. Dorian stepped through the smoke. Another Dominion squad awaited him, weapons ready. He didn't hesitate. Raising his stolen rifle, he opened fire, cutting them down before they could react. He grabbed a Dominion officer by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "Where's the reactor core?" the officer hissed in defiance. Dorian sighed and pulled out another grenade. "Listen, I don't have time for this. You tell me, you live. You don't... well..." He let the grenade roll in his palm. The officer's eyes widened. "Sector 7G, down 2 levels. See? That wasn't so hard." Dorian let him go, then knocked him unconscious with the butt of his rifle. He checked his ammo. Low. Not great, didn't matter. Now he had a target. He was going to blow this ship straight to hell. Dorian Reyes moved fast. The Dominion's warship was an iron fortress, but he had fought inside these things before. The halls were sleek, metallic, and eerily clean. Too clean for a vessel made for war. The Dominion liked order, precision. That was their weakness. Because war wasn't clean. War was chaos. And Dorian? He was chaos. The sirens screamed overhead as he sprinted down the corridor, his boots pounding against the floor. Somewhere above him, Dominion officers were barking orders, trying to lock him down. But they were too slow, too rigid. He had already memorized the layout from a stolen data slate weeks ago. Sector 7G, 2 levels down. Reactor core. The heart of the ship. Take it out, and the whole war machine crumbles. He ducked into a side passage as a squad of Dominion soldiers rounded the corner, their rifles at the ready. He heard them barking in their chittering language, scanning the area. They moved like machines, like programmed drones following protocol. Dorian smirked. He had no use for protocol. He pulled a smoke grenade from his belt, twisted the cap, and rolled it into the hallway. The moment it hissed to life, filling the air with thick gray fog, he moved. Bursting from cover, he fired 3 quick shots, taking down 2 soldiers before they could react. The third turned toward him, but Dorian was already on him, slamming his rifle butt into the Dominion's face. The alien crumpled. Dorian stepped over the bodies and kept moving. High Warlord Vec watched the carnage unfold from the security monitors. He had expected a tactical strike, a precision attack from an organized human unit. Instead, he was watching a single human tear through his warship like a virus. Vec's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "How is he still alive?" An officer hesitated. "We flooded the lower decks with nerve gas, but..." "But what?" Vec snarled. The officer gulped. "The human set fire to it." Vec's mandibles twitched. "He what?" The officer replayed the footage, grainy, chaotic. The human had ruptured a fuel line and ignited it, burning away the toxic gas before it could kill him. It was reckless. It was absurd. It had worked. Vec exhaled slowly, fury bubbling inside him. "This is not a soldier," he muttered. "This is something else. A predator. A monster. A human." Dorian Reyes reached the reactor core. The door was massive, thick enough to withstand a direct missile strike. Dominion engineers weren't stupid. They knew this was their most vital system. But Dorian had learned one thing about Dominion tech. It was too perfect, and perfect things had cracks. He knelt beside the door's control panel, prying it open with his knife. Inside, glowing blue circuitry pulsed in delicate patterns. Dominion technology was miles ahead of human tech, but it was also predictable. Dorian yanked out a handful of wires. The door shuddered. He yanked out another. The metal hissed as emergency mechanisms engaged, struggling to stay online. Sparks rained from the panel. Then, with a heavy groan, the door unlocked. Dorian grinned. They always over-engineer things. He stepped inside. The reactor chamber was vast, filled with glowing energy conduits and thick coolant pipes. The Dominion relied on plasma cores, stable, powerful but dangerously volatile when tampered with. Dorian had no intention of tampering. He was here to destroy. He pulled 3 explosive charges from his belt, setting them against the main reactor housing. The Dominion built their cores with redundancy, but nothing survived 3 synchronized blasts at point-blank range. As he armed the detonators, his comm crackled. "Reyes," Vasquez's voice came through, tense. "You might want to hurry. The Dominion just scrambled their entire fleet. They know you're there." Dorian smirked. "Took 'em long enough?" "Evac's in 2 minutes. You make it or you don't." Dorian took one last look at the explosives. All set. He pressed the detonator, locking in a 3-minute countdown. Then, he ran. Vec's mandibles twitched as alarms blared through the ship. "Warning," the automated Dominion voice droned. "Reactor overload in 2 minutes, 50 seconds. Vec rose from his throne. "Get me a status update now." A trembling officer checked the readings. "The human," he set charges on the reactor. Vec's vision darkened with rage. He had spent his life conquering civilizations, commanding fleets, shaping history itself. And now he was being humiliated by one man? Unacceptable. The warship shuddered as the self-destruct countdown continued. 2 minutes left. Vec clenched his fists. "Kill him." Dorian Reyes was running out of time. His stolen rifle was empty. His body ached. His lungs burned. And Dominion soldiers were everywhere. He sprinted through the halls, dodging gunfire as bullets and plasma bolts tore through the walls behind him. He dove into a side corridor, barely avoiding an explosion. His comm crackled again. 1 minute left, Reyes. Where the hell are you? Dorian gritted his teeth. He needed a way out. Now then, he saw it. A docking bay. A fighter. Still running, Dorian yanked a Dominion officer's pistol from a fallen soldier and fired at the fuel lines above the bay. Flames erupted, causing chaos as Dominion engineers scrambled for safety. Dorian seized the moment, sprinting toward the nearest fighter, a sleek, black Dominion interceptor. He vaulted into the cockpit. The controls were alien, unreadable, but he didn't need to understand them. He just needed one button. His fingers found the ignition switch. The engine roared to life. Dominion guards rushed forward, weapons raised, too late. Dorian slammed the thrusters. The fighter launched out of the bay into open space. Behind him, the dreadnought trembled. The reactor hit critical mass. And then, a firestorm erupted. The warship detonated, a blinding explosion consuming everything. The shockwave rocked Dorian's fighter as he gripped the controls, teeth bared. He barely managed to stabilize. His comm crackled. Vasquez's voice. "Oh, Reyes, did you make it?" Dorian exhaled, grinning. "Yeah." He glanced at the inferno behind him. "I handled it." The Dominion's greatest warship was gone. What had once been a symbol of their unstoppable conquest was now nothing but scattered debris drifting through space. Flames still licked the shattered remains, and emergency distress beacons flickered weakly, their signals lost in the silence of the void. Dorian Reyes adjusted the controls of his stolen fighter, angling toward the rendezvous point where the human fleet was waiting. His body ached from the relentless sprint through the Dominion's war machine, his mind still running on pure adrenaline. But he had done it. One man, one mission, and a Titan-class dreadnought was nothing but space dust. His comm crackled again, and Vasquez's voice came through. "All right, Reyes, I'm officially out of words. You're either the luckiest bastard alive or just too damn stubborn to die." Dorian smirked, tilting his fighter slightly so he could get a better look at the wreckage behind him. "Maybe both." "Fleet's on standby," Vasquez continued. "The moment that dreadnought went up, the Dominion fleet started pulling back. I think we just bought ourselves a hell of an advantage." Dorian knew what that meant. Fear. The Dominion had never feared anything before. They had marched across the stars, conquering species with cold, calculated precision. But now, they had seen something they didn't understand. A human. Alone. And he had torn them apart. High Warlord Vec stood in the shattered remains of his throne room. The bridge of his warship had been on the highest deck, overlooking the stars like a god surveying his domain. Now nothing remained but a twisted, blackened shell drifting in space. The emergency escape pod had barely saved his life. His fleet was in chaos. The humans had crippled their supply lines, destroyed their most powerful warship, and turned the tide of battle in a way no species ever had. And the worst part? It had not been an army, not a fleet, not a strategic council of masterminds. It had been one. One single human had done all of this. Vec's claws scraped against the metal console as he replayed the security footage one more time. The human running through the corridors. The human tearing through Dominion warriors like they were nothing. The human setting charges on the reactor core without hesitation. And then, the last transmission before his warship exploded. I handled it. Vec shut off the display. His breath came in ragged bursts, his mind a whirl of emotions he had never felt before. He had underestimated them. That was his mistake. That was the Dominion's mistake. He could feel it now, a shift in the war, in the way the galaxy would speak of humans from this day forward. The Dominion had thought them weak, simple, a species to be crushed like all the rest. But they weren't weak. They were something else. They were creatures that thrived in chaos, who fought hardest when they had nothing left. They were reckless, unpredictable, and terrifyingly determined. And when they said, "I'll handle it," the war was already over. Vec exhaled and turned to his remaining officers. "Send a message to the High Command," he ordered. His voice was steady, but deep beneath the surface, something had cracked. "Tell them, we may have made a mistake." Back at the human fleet, Dorian Reyes touched down on the main carrier, the UNS Retribution. The hangar was already buzzing with activity. Engineers scrambling to repair damaged fighters, medics rushing to assist the wounded. The air was thick with sweat, blood, and the undeniable energy of victory. As soon as he climbed out of the stolen fighter, a squad of soldiers rushed toward him, cheering and clapping him on the back. He grinned, wincing at the soreness in his ribs. General Foster stood at the edge of the hangar, arms crossed, watching him with a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. Dorian walked up, giving a lazy salute. "Mission accomplished, sir." Foster sighed. "You're a goddamn nightmare, Reyes." Dorian smirked. "I try." Foster shook his head, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You realize what you just did, don't you?" Dorian glanced around. The entire fleet had been preparing for a long, grueling war against an enemy they had never thought they could match. And now? Now the Dominion was retreating. Now humanity had a chance. Dorian shrugged. "Yeah, I handled it." The human fleet was alive with energy. Victory. It wasn't a word they had used often in this war. They had been surviving, resisting, clawing out scraps of hope where they could. But now? Now they had done something impossible. A single human had walked onto the Dominion's deadliest warship and turned it into a graveyard. And the enemy knew it. Dorian Reyes sat in the debriefing room aboard the UNS Retribution, his bruised body aching from every movement. His uniform was still ripped, stained with dried blood, but he hadn't changed. He was too busy enjoying the moment. Across from him, General Foster paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. The older man was calm, always thinking ahead, but even he couldn't hide the smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You really did it," Foster said finally, shaking his head. Dorian leaned back, propping his boots up on the table. "Yeah, not bad, huh?" "Not bad?" Foster scoffed. "You took down a Titan-class dreadnought, crippled their supply lines, and made the Dominion panic. I'd say that's a little more than not bad." Dorian grinned, despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "Hey, I told you, I'd handle it." Foster sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're impossible." Then, after a beat, he added, "But we needed this." That was an understatement. The Dominion had been winning for years. Every battle had been a desperate struggle just to hold the line. But now, for the first time, humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were winning. Across the stars, in the Dominion's Central War Council, the High Command was in turmoil. The chamber was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Vec stood before the gathered warlords, his armor still dented from the destruction of his warship. His voice was steady, but deep beneath the surface, there was something new. Doubt. "They are not what we believed them to be," he said. The warlords hissed in displeasure. "They are primitives," one of them snapped. "A mistake of evolution. They should have been eradicated months ago." Vec's mandibles clicked together. And yet, one of them destroyed a Titan-class warship, alone. The chamber fell silent. They had all seen the reports, the footage, the way the human, this Dorian Reyes, had torn through their forces with reckless defiance. One soldier, one man, and he had done more damage in a single mission than entire fleets had in years. Another warlord growled, slamming his clawed hand onto the table. He was an anomaly, a statistical outlier. Vec stared at him. Was he? He turned to the display at the center of the room, showing the latest intelligence reports. The human fleet wasn't just surviving anymore. They were pushing forward. Dominion outposts were falling. Supply lines were failing. And every time they tried to counterattack, the same words kept appearing in intercepted transmissions. A phrase the humans repeated with unshakable certainty. I'll handle it. Vec exhaled slowly. It is not just one soldier. It is all of them. Their minds do not function like ours. We calculate risk. We weigh consequences. They do not. He gestured to the reports. They win battles they should lose. They survive what should kill them. And now they believe they can defeat us. Silence. Then, one of the warlords, older and more cautious than the others, spoke. And if they are right? No one answered. For the first time in Dominion history, they did not know. Dorian stood at the observation deck of the Retribution, staring out at the stars. The wreckage of the Dominion fleet was still drifting out there, a silent monument to what had just happened. Vasquez walked up beside him, arms crossed. So what now? Dorian took a deep breath. Now. He let out a slow exhale, eyes locked on the distant stars. Now we stop surviving. Vasquez raised an eyebrow. And start what? Dorian's lips curled into a smirk. Winning. Because for the first time since the war had started, humanity had something more powerful than weapons or technology. They had momentum, and they weren't stopping. The war had changed. For years, humanity had been fighting with their backs against the wall, always retreating, always barely surviving. The Dominion had been a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable. But now, the impossible had happened. Now, humanity was winning. Dorian Reyes walked through the war room aboard the UNS Retribution, surrounded by high-ranking officers, strategists, and battlefield commanders. The holomap in the center of the room showed a growing wave of red. Dominion territory. And it was shrinking. General Foster stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. We've analyzed the latest intel. The Dominion is pulling back, not a full retreat, but they've slowed their offensives. He tapped the holomap, zooming in on key systems. They're refortifying their inner colonies. They know they've lost momentum. A murmur ran through the room. This was unprecedented. The Dominion had never slowed down for anyone. Foster turned to Dorian. You started this, Reyes. So tell me, what's our next move?